Mr. Nathan Savage serves as a Senior Vice President and Group Leader of Oil and Gas Midstream Solution Group at Savage Industries. Mr. Savage has served in other roles as a Senior Vice President, a Group Leader Refinery and Sulfur Service Group of Savage Industry. Prior to joining Savage in 1995, he joined Savage in 1995. Prior to that, he got his undergraduate and graduate's degree, his undergraduate at BYU and his MBA at West Virginia, is that correct? He's married and lives in Draper. He has a wife, 4 children, 2 of whom are graduates of UVU and 1 who is attending UVU. 3 grandchildren. He said, those are the most important part of my life. Why did we leave them off? So I was grateful to get that personal information. Now that I've introduced him, I'm going to just delay just a minute and tell you that next week we've had a switch in speakers. The person who was going to speak, my son Tommy McDonald, had an issue come up and is not going to be able to be here next week. But we're thrilled that Artie Woodbury of the Woodbury Corporation will be here. Mr. Woodbury is an accomplished young man who started his career on Wall Street and in England, and has come to join the family business. We'll tell you more about him next week. We're excited to have him here as our concluding speaker. If you do have any last speakers that you missed and you want to watch their YouTube video and make that work up, please contact Haley and she'll help direct that to you if you can't find that YouTube video. So please join me in giving a Wolverine welcome to Mr. Nathan Savage.
Good morning. I'm glad to be with all of you today and spend a little time. I'm grateful to Dean Wright and Dean McDonald and Dean Vig for their welcome. Let me just start out by saying this is a great institution. I hope you appreciate the opportunity you have to be students at UVU. My father was involved with this university many years ago. In fact, he received an honorary doctorate from this organization, this school. And as a family, we are amazed at what you're doing, and I know the future is very, very bright. So I'm going to take just a few minutes and tell you a little bit about Savage, who we are, what we do. But then I want to get into something that I think will maybe have a bigger impact, hopefully, on you and as you think about what kind of life you want to have. Savage started back in 1946 when Kenneth, in that bottom left picture, who was my uncle, returned from World War II. He was on Saipan for 19 months, and he joked he could have seen the whole thing in about 19 minutes. And he saved every dime he earned as a mechanic in the Navy. And when he got home, he found a willing partner in my grandfather, and they bought an old truck. The truck pictured there on the right. And in time, my father and another uncle joined, and so the 3 of them got in business together. And they really focused on transportation systems. In that day, they were moving coal and timber in Utah and Idaho, and they worked really hard. My grandfather told them that he was going to get them head over heels in debt, and then he was going to leave them. And he did exactly that. He died in 1958 of a massive heart attack after working about a 12-hour shift. So the 3 of them got together and decided that they could work together and that they wanted to make a go of it. And the rest, they say, is history. So they felt really strong, though, before they passed from mortality. Kenneth died a number of years ago. Luke died in about 11 years ago. And then my father passed away 5 years ago this week. That it wasn't just what the company does that was important, but it was how we do things, our values. And so they left with us what we call our vision and legacy. We consider it our cultural constitution, if you will. And you'll notice some key words in there that are highlighted. And interestingly enough, many of those words parallel some of the same values that I see espoused in the mission of this great university. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So if you say, what does Savage do? Today, as an organization, there's really 3 primary areas. We enable our customers and partners, literally, to feed the world, power our lives, and sustain the planet. Now you say, how exactly do you do that? Let me share that with you. First is with the agricultural sector. This last summer, we acquired a company called Bartlett. It's a large grain company where they source grain right in the field, corn and wheat and soybeans and all of those things, and they move and manage this all the way to the point of final end use. As an example, are any of you by chance from Mexico or of Mexican descent? Mexico, great. Mexico is a beautiful, wonderful country. In spite of the nonsense you hear on television sometimes, it is a great country. But due to laws that were enacted many years ago, there's not farming on a large commercial scale in Mexico. So Mexico has to import a significant amount of the food that it needs for its country. We ship about 20% of all grain imports into the country of Mexico. So you say, well, where in the U.S. might our business touch your life? Have any of you ever eaten a Cheez-It cracker? We mill all the flour. We source and mill all the flour for Cheez-It crackers. Or have any of you ever had a Krispy Kreme? I've obviously had a few. Krispy Kreme, we mill the flour for that. Or any of you from Virginia or North Carolina or South Carolina? If you've ever had a McDonald's hamburger, we milled the flour that went into the bun. So that's what we do within the agricultural sector. We also are involved in animal feeds and things like that. But we move and manage the bulk grains in sourcing it all the way to end use in making that happen. So that's how we work with serving our customers and partners to feed the world. Now you say, what about powering our lives? That's our energy and chemical sector. And this is the sector that I've spent most of my career involved in. We move and manage coal, plastics, chemicals, oil, gas, and we enable the production in all of those different industries. So we work a lot in downstream oil refining, in serving oil refineries throughout North America as well as in Saudi Arabia. And then we're heavily involved in the mid and upstream oil and gas sector as well as the chemical sector. One of the things that has taken place in this country is it used to be that we were looking at importing natural gas. There's a lot of noise about hydraulic fracturing and the environment and things like that, but done right, it's created a renaissance in our country, where now we are actually in a position to export natural gas, but natural gas is a basic building block for many of the things that you use in your everyday life, drinking a bottle of water, the plastic that's in that, or some of the fibers in your clothing, things like that. So we're involved in things of that nature. You say, how might the things that we do impact your life? If you drink a soda, let's say one of you have a late final and you're drinking a can of Red Bull. The aluminum that holds that Red Bull, we actually provide some of the materials that go into making the aluminum for that. Have any of you ever been to the city of Boston? Okay, if you're in Boston and you have a glass of water out of the tap, we handle the chemicals that went into the water purification system for the city of Boston. Or have any of you ever been to New York City? Anybody from New York? If you drink a Pepsi in New York City, we handle the corn sweetener that went in to make that Pepsi Cola. And so we're involved in a wide array of industries, in trucks, trains, ships, barges, terminals. Those are the assets we move to move and manage the bulk materials across this sector. The next area that we're focused on is in the environmental sector. And to sum it up, we do emergency response to mitigate spills, things of that nature. We manage regulated waste. And then we do environmental remediation. This is a fairly new sector of the company. I actually am responsible now for this area. And I've transitioned out of the oil and gas area, so this is just happening. But this is a great area, and we're doubling down on this area because there isn't anywhere you go or anything you see where there isn't a lot of discussion around doing things in an environmentally sensitive way. And many of the industries that we work with, as well as many other industries, this is a hot topic. Because these are products and things that we need every day, but it can be done right. So in a way so as to not adversely impact the environment. And so those are the things that we do in that area. Now, this gives you just a little glimpse of where we're located. We have about 5,000 team members in about 300 locations across North America and the Middle East. And then we have project work in other parts of the world. And we have a heck of a lot of fun doing it. I wanted to spend a little time with you today talking about the principles of success. My father, that you can see in that picture, and that's my 4 daughters from a few years ago, had a saying. He said, "Nothing is sweeter than success." And I knew what he always meant by that, but as life has gone on, I've come to realize that there are varying views of what denotes success. I'm guessing as a college student, and it doesn't seem like it's been that long since I was a college student, In many people's lives, success meant having enough to be able to pay your rent, being able to buy your books, maybe eventually buy a home, not have a car payment, things like that. And yes, that's an element of it, but I think it's a lot more. I think it's a whole lot more. And what I want to share with you for a few minutes are my views of what denotes success, and then you see if it has application in your life. These are three principles, certainly not intended to be an all-exhaustive list, but these are three principles that I think have everything to do with success. Living a values-based life, or living in accordance with your stated values, because I think that's where peace and harmony comes. Being a provider, that's more than providing for ourselves, that's being a provider for our families and others, and then making a difference in life. I think a life that is centered just on ourselves isn't a very fulfilling or satisfying life. So I want to go through each one of these in a little more detail. But to help illustrate the point with regards to living a values-based life, I want you to listen to this.
In Salt Lake City, early on a Saturday morning, the Key Bank building was brought down with a series of well-placed detonations. It all happened in 3 or 4 seconds, with a great cloud of dust that rolled to the northwest. The process is called an implosion, in contrast with an explosion. The building was constructed nearly 30 years ago. I suppose construction extended over a period of at least a year, maybe 2. Now it was gone in seconds. That, my friends, is the story of so many lives. We nurture them ever so carefully over a period of years. Then we find ourselves in highly charged circumstances. Mistakes are made. Chastity is compromised. There is an implosion, and a ball of dust is all that is left.
How many of you have seen situations like this in individuals' lives in your life? Have any of you ever seen things like this happen? You know, it's interesting. I had breakfast this morning with a senior officer of the Union Pacific Railroad. And this is somebody I've known for many, many years, and he's a good personal friend. And we were talking about a mutual acquaintance that we have, and somebody that had just a stellar career and great things happening. And unfortunately, through a series of missteps, absolutely derailed. And all that was left was a cloud of dust. Now, can this person rebuild their life? Yes, they can. But a reputation and integrity are built over a lifetime. And all it takes is a matter of a few bad decisions to seriously tarnish your life, the organization that you're affiliated with, the career that you've developed, your family's good name, all of those things. And as I said before, I think it's impossible to truly have internal peace and joy in life if you live inconsistent with your internally held values. It doesn't work. When there's alignment between your values and your life, whatever those are, that's where I believe great peace and happiness can come from. That, my friends, I believe is a key underpinning of a successful life. And it's rooted in integrity, it's rooted in trust, and it's rooted in making the necessary steps to keep yourself on that path. The second thing I want to talk about is being a provider. And I think that has to do with a lot of different areas. First of all, you've got to be a financial provider. I'm a big proponent of paying our own way and doing the things that are necessary to be self-sufficient. Now, I don't believe any of us are quote-unquote self-made. I don't subscribe to that school of thought. There's a lot of people in my life that have helped me, mentors and friends and people that have encouraged me along the way. But we've got to be financial providers. This picture in that above that word, that's my daughter McCall. She graduated from this university this last spring. That's her husband, Austin. He's actually in law school right now at BYU. They're taking the steps right now, sacrifice. I can tell you, they're struggling. They're struggling financially. But they're doing the right things in order to be self-sufficient in the long term. And I commend each of you for doing the things necessary to be able to provide for yourselves and your families as you go down the road. Being an emotional provider, that can mean being a shoulder to cry on, be a listening ear. It can also mean telling somebody that you care about what they need to hear, even if they don't want to hear it. Because I think oftentimes those that care the most about us are willing to do that, even if it hurts a little bit. Because as long as it's rooted in trust and a deep-seated relationship, it works. That girl with all those little kids, that's my daughter that's currently a student here at UVU. She's a psychology major here at UVU. And this is her working with a group of young girls in a cheer clinic. And she found that it wasn't just about cheer. Those girls wanted a friend. They wanted somebody that they could talk to. Well, I think all of us have those experiences if we'll look for them in our lives. In being an emotional support. Because the reality is, none of us have it all figured out. None of us do. We all need each other. And we need to be able to look to one another for support and help and guidance and direction. The other area is being a spiritual provider. Now, I'm a person of faith. I don't know about your backgrounds, but I believe there's an element of this potentially in all of our lives. So whatever your background is, I would encourage you to dig deep. Think about the things that matter most to you from a spiritual perspective, and then help support others in their journey. It doesn't mean that their journey is the same as yours. Different isn't necessarily bad. It's just different. But we should have respect, and we should care for one another and respect differences. That picture is my father. He was one of those spiritual mentors in my life. And we had a lot of deep talks about that topic. And I knew I could always count on him to be like that North Star in my life, to help me and guide me in the things that were important to me. I think all of us have the ability to be like a North Star in other people's lives. And what a wonderful opportunity that can be. The next area I want to talk about is making a difference. I think Mother Teresa is one of the most inspiring people to have ever walked this earth. To think for just a minute about the humble circumstances that she came from. It would have been very easy for her to say, I'm a person of little consequence. I don't have resources. I don't have the ability to make a big difference. And oh, by the way, she was little tiny in stature. She could have walked in a room and you wouldn't have known she was there, literally, because she was so small in stature, if there were a sea of taller people. But think for just a minute, and it's there on the slide, some of the things that she accomplished. Somebody once made this statement to her. They said, look, there's all these needs across the world. And they started quoting statistics and all the things that they felt like she couldn't get to. She simply responded, I'm not interested in statistics. I'm interested in people. And if it makes a difference for one of them, the effort's been worthwhile. I believe all of us have the ability to make a tremendous difference. Just a couple of days ago, I had the opportunity to visit with just a fantastic lady who lives in Salt Lake City and lived in an area of Salt Lake where she noticed a lot of people who were originally from other countries at the bus stops. People that were dressed in African dress or Middle Eastern dress. She was intrigued by this, so she did a little homework and found that she lived close to an area where there were a number of refugees that had been resettled from other parts of the world. They didn't have the choice to come here. It was like pull out a hat out of a lottery bucket, and they were selected to come here. And oh, by the way, as soon as they arrive, they have to start repaying their plane tickets and things like that. She said, I've got to do something to help these people. Because there was a lady on a corner holding a little tiny newborn child who was trying to get to a place that was going to lend some support to help this person as they were making a transition to a whole new life. She thought the address said 300 South in Salt Lake City. she didn't understand the difference between 300 South versus 3300 South. She was 30 blocks off. It was cold, it was snowing, and she's holding this little child. So this lady I met pulled around the corner, invited this lady into her car, understood, had a conversation with her, found out what it was she needed, and drove her to the destination. Then she went into this place, started learning a little bit about some of the resources. Now she started her own nonprofit in conjunction with this organization, trying to help people that literally aren't in a position yet to help themselves. And she came to realize they're people just like we are. The difference is we maybe have received some opportunities or given a chance. And one of the people that she worked with made a difference. He said, look, I don't want a handout. What I want is some help to catch up so that I can help make a difference in people's lives too. I think Mother Teresa is an incredibly inspiring example as to somebody that made a difference and defied the odds and said, I think I can do something about this. Because it was never really about her, was it? She did the right thing and she did it for the right reason. Now, let's think a little bit about UVU. There's some words that stand out that I think make a big difference. Success. We've talked about principles of success and why this matters. But there's a couple of other words in there that I think denote success. Integrity is one of them, because I would argue that that is the underpinning of everything. There's that old saying that of all of the principles of leadership, example stands supreme. Have any of you ever truly followed somebody that you didn't respect or trust or who is dishonest? I won't. And I think it makes all the difference in the world. The other one is stewardship. This principle of taking something and making it better. I think that says a lot about an individual when they don't just want to consume it, but they want to enhance it. Not just preserve it, enhance it, make it better, and carry it forward for the next generation. This is one of my favorite paintings. Many of you will probably recognize this. It was painted by Arnold Freiberg. Here's General Washington. Prayer at Valley Forge. I used to live in Pennsylvania, and so this area is near and dear to my heart, and I know Dean Wright spent a significant amount of time in this part of the country as well when he was at the Wharton School. Think about what this depicts. He's the general of the army. He becomes the first president of this great nation, and yet he was humble enough to acknowledge he didn't have all the answers and that he needed help. Now, whether it be help from a higher power or help from your neighbor or help from a family member, help from a professor, help from a student who you associate with here, all of us can be a source of help. And I think that has a lot to do with making things better for the next generation. I can share with you that in our business, we don't talk a lot about this, but as a family, we own Savage Companies 100% by our family, but we never ever talk about it. And here's why. We don't really own it. Our attitude is it's been entrusted to us. But the only thing I believe we take with us from this life is the knowledge we've gained and the relationships that we develop. My dad used to always say, son, that ought to say something about where you focus your time and energy. But the other reason we don't use the term ownership is we see it more as a stewardship. It's like the parable of the talents. What did you do with it? What did you do with something to make it better? Make it better for those that will come after you. All of you have the opportunity, while you're students here at UVU, in your career, in community service, in church service, whatever it might be, to function as stewards. And I would argue if all of us would spend less time worrying about what I own or what's in it for me, to what can I do to give back? What can I do to make a difference? One of the real fallacies in academia today, and I realize there's a lot of pressure in business schools with rankings, starting salaries and rankings, all those kinds of things. But one of the real flaws I see today is it creates an environment where students come out with an attitude sometimes, not always, sometimes, of show me the money. I'm a believer that the cream always rises. If you're doing the right thing in the right organization, it will be recognized. And you'll have opportunities to grow and expand and take things on and do better. All of those things together, I believe, lead to great success in your personal life, in your professional life, and in the lives of those that are close to you. Because it's like a saying says, the bridges we build for others are the ones we cross over ourselves. Now, it's important to remember, do the right things, but do them for the right reason. You don't build that bridge because you want to get over it too. You do it because you care about people. You want to make a difference in their lives, and you genuinely care about them. The fringe benefit that comes back to you is you get to enjoy the journey as well. Thank you. I'd be happy to field any questions that you may have. Yes?
So, since your company is heavily involved in the oil and gas industry, exactly how is your company working with the inevitable run out of fossil fuels?
It's a great question. Yeah, so the question was, we're involved heavily in oil and gas. And the statement was the inevitable run out of oil and gas product or fossil fuel. I think there's two parts to my response. One, we keep developing technology that is making these things possible, which I think natural gas is a good example of that. We were looking at importing it, now we're looking at exporting it. Is there an endless supply? I'm not going to sit here and tell you there is. I don't know that there is. I personally don't believe that there is. But we are looking at ways to become more efficient in how we do things. You look at the announcement from General Motors this week. I know it wasn't real popular, and there's a lot of heat that's being directed from Washington towards Detroit right now. But really, that's about technology. That's really what that play is about. In saying, how do we take the limited resources we have on this earth, and how do we better deploy those resources into technology in order to make sure that we can be sustainable? The other thing is specific to our company, I'll share with you, you touched on something very important. That's one of the reasons why we've branched off beyond our traditional oil and gas or energy-centric business, knowing that was largely around fossil fuels, and why we're involved in agriculture. I have found no substitute for food. Last time I checked, we all need to eat. And I've never found a substitute for grains and things like that. We need those things. The other thing, though, is to do with the environmental side. We're actually involved. In fact, this afternoon, I'm meeting with senior representatives of one of the largest energy companies in Europe. And they'll be in our office this afternoon talking about using CO2, captured CO2, to enhance the recovery of oil and gas, thereby reducing the carbon intensity of oil and gas production. So those are the kinds of things that we're doing to try to further things, so improve the environment, but also improve the efficiency by which these things are happening, in addition to the support we're giving, because that same company is heavily involved in battery technology. They just took a position in a solar company and others, and so those are some of the things that we're little by little getting into. I think one of the challenges is the technology is still evolving. And I think we all see that, and we've got a lot of work to do. But in conjunction with that, we also, I think it's okay, Dean Wright, to say that we actually have a team of students from your MBA program actually working right now on looking at, from an environmental standpoint, at how we can further some of those things. And so we see it as a partnership with UVU, and the thesis was, if we gave you $100 million, where would you invest it to further these things? Well, that's not just some hypothetical thing. Those are the kinds of things that we're doing today. Did that answer your question? Yes. Here in the back.
Yeah. Have President Trump's policies and his administration helped or hurt your business?
Both. Let me tell you why. Certainly the corporate tax rate has helped, and I can share with you that we're using that to heavily reinvest in our business. I mean, this deal with Bartlett that I shared with you, that's not a small transaction by any stretch of the imagination, and it's enabled us to do some of those kinds of things because of the corporate tax rates. So there have been some helps. At the same time, it's been a challenge because of some of the uncertainties. As I indicated, we ship a lot of product to Mexico. We'll have 32 unit trains being anywhere from about 80 to 110 cars. We'll have 32 unit trains between the U.S. and Mexico on any given day moving grain. So when President Trump is talking about temporarily closing the border or doing things that are disruptive, that can create questions. Or an example would be some of the uncertainty with China over tariffs. We handle a lot of soybeans. There's a lot of uncertainty around things like that. So I would say from our oil and gas sector, generally it's been more favorable. But at the same time, we're not resting on that. I mean, you have to consider, it's been during the Trump administration that we've continued to expand our business beyond traditional oil and gas or the traditional energy sector into agriculture, into the environmental side, saying that that's just the right thing to do for our business long term. So I would say generally it's been some help, but sometimes some of the rhetoric and some of the noise around it creates uncertainty in the marketplace. I mean, you look at the Dow, just this whole roller coaster thing that we're on. I don't think that's healthy for markets, and I think that creates some uncertainty. And when there's uncertainty, I think people pull back on investment. So it's nice that the tax incentives have helped, but at the same time, it's a concern. And personally, this is my personal bias, I think it's a bad principle to ever spend more than you earn. And I think we have to be really wise in how we do those things, both in our individual lives and as a nation. Other questions? Yes?
Going back to a personal level, on your principles of success, do you take a moment to share your philosophy of prioritization?
Say that again?
Prioritizing within perspectives of your life.
Years ago, my dad pulled me aside one day, and he said, "Son, you're getting pretty busy." And he said, "You are maybe getting too busy to where you're going to not be very effective at anything and maybe mediocre at a lot of things." I think it's about trade-offs. And somebody that I really look up to gave a talk here a few years ago, and he talked about the principles of good, better, best. I think that's a personal decision we all have to make in saying, what's the highest and best use of our time and our resources? And if you back it up then to say, what are my values? I think that creates a real clear filter by which we measure, is this good? Is there something else that's better? Or what's the highest and best use of my time? We do that all the time in business. One of the responsibilities, for example, I sit on our board, and one of the responsibilities of the board is to allocate capital, saying what's going to garner the highest and best return on that capital? Well, we all have capital in our individual lives. It's time. Nobody's allocated more, nobody's allocated less. We all have 24 hours in a day. How do we allocate that time? I think ultimately that becomes our destiny in saying what matters. Because if we're saying I want to accomplish this, but all my time is spent on that, we may have to course correct and bring it back into alignment. I can share with you, for me personally, life's had to become a lot more focused over the last 5 to 10 years. It's my family. I have, in my faith, I have some church responsibilities that keep me pretty hitched up, and it's our business. And there's not a lot of extra time. And I think sometimes people want recreation to become a lifestyle rather than recreation for purposes of rest. And I was probably a little out of balance in a hobby that I had at one point in time. And so that's the way I'm working on it. But when you figure out the answer to that, look me up, because I'll take all the advice I can get, and I really mean that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So how do you develop and maintain good relationships with your partners and like your workers in Mexico and the Middle East and other countries?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. And let me give you an example. I know there's a fair number of students at this university from Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, there is in essence, a law or a program called Saudiization. And it requires that over a period of time, you have to have a higher and higher percentage of native Saudis within the workforce. First of all, we don't call anybody that works with us employees. They're team members. We're all on this same team. And one of the things that we say in our company is no one works for anybody. We work with one another. Yes, we have reporting structures and things like that, but that's an important distinction. Well, when we first went to Saudi Arabia, we had other companies that said, oh, you know what, you're going to have to just hire those folks and put them on a couch somewhere and let them watch movies or whatever, and then you're going to have to hire other people to actually do the work because they won't do the work. Our experience has been the exact opposite of that. I think generally, wherever you live in the world, people are people. And I think you can find good people everywhere. And what our experience has been is that when you treat people right, when you're honest, you're fair, you recognize they're trying to provide for their families just like we are. We all draw from the same breadbasket, if you will, of life. And when you treat people accordingly, I think people recognize that, they step up, and again, it's about caring about people. There's no substitute for that. You can tell when somebody's a fake or a fraud. You know that. You don't need somebody to tell you if you feel like, you know, if somebody's approaching you, but you know darn good and well it's about them. I don't believe in playing politics. I don't do any of those things. I believe in just doing what's right, because I think that always prevails. And I think people recognize that and will step up when it's that kind of environment. And that's why I think the cream rises in a good organization. Not all organizations see things that way. I acknowledge that. And if they don't, and if you're a part of that and you don't feel like it's working, go somewhere else. I would. Other questions? Yes?
One of the previous questions, you mentioned you had to build focus in the last 5 to 10 years so you could accomplish more. What do you do to build focus?
I think it goes back to your comment about prioritization. I think realizing none of us can be all things to all people. You can't cover everything. We all have limited time and limited resources. And I think one of the most important things with regards to resources is our time. And so, excuse me, so with regards to focus, I think it really becomes an opportunity to say what matters most to me. Excuse me. I was in eastern Utah yesterday touring oil and gas operations. And I got some allergies that it hammered me. I apologize. But I think sometimes it just means taking on less and being better at those things you choose to do. I think that's maybe one of the most important ways. Yes?
A quick question. Just back to globalization, because Trump does make the point of globalization kind of in negative, and kind of with a negative tone. In your experience, does globalization, and his point is that globalization hurts American companies, you know, by going to China, by going to outsourcing stuff. In your experience, have you seen that to be true, or does globalization actually help the U.S. economy?
Well, as I indicated, we're not just a U.S.-based or U.S. company. A big segment of our business is outside the United States. It's important to us. The reality is we live in a global economy. I think we're kidding ourselves to say that we don't, or that that's not right. Many of the things that make this country great didn't originate here. They originated in other parts of the world. And we should embrace those things and appreciate it. Now, I'm all for a level and fair playing field. I'm all for making sure that people are treated right and that there are laws and regulations in place to make sure that things are appropriate. But as long as there's a basic underpinning of fairness and the way people are treated and the way businesses are conducted, my attitude is, bring it on. We'll compete, and we'll do the right things. And so that's where I think one of my concerns is the pendulum tends to swing pretty far one way or the other. I don't agree with that. I'm more of a middle of the road guy in doing what's fair and balanced, and I think that applies to globalization in how we approach things. Because, by the way, we depend a lot on other countries for the vehicles we drive. I mean, I parked in your parking garage. I saw a lot of vehicles that originated, if you will, from other countries. Now, they may be built here, but the companies that are behind them aren't U.S.-based companies. Many of the clothes that you're wearing today didn't necessarily get manufactured here. And so I think the reality is we're dependent on those other countries, and we should be fair in how we approach that. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Have you ever had any experience where you're about to do something manipulative or dishonest to gain more money for companies, and how do you manage your fiduciary responsibility as an executive and your employees while also retaining your value?
Our team members. Yes, I have. And, excuse me. Yeah, the question was, have I ever been approached with a situation where, in essence, I was asked to be dishonest? And by being dishonest, it would somehow leg the company up financially or something like that. Yes, I have had those experiences. Somebody taught me a long time ago, though, you only have to tell the truth once, but a lie follows you forever. And my attitude is, my integrity is not for sale. Our company's integrity is not for sale. And it isn't about the fact that you go to jail for those things, by the way. You don't have to look back very many days before you find an example out of Japan with regards to an auto manufacturer and something that didn't go too well. But I did business with a guy who was a very, very senior officer with a very, very large company based in Latin America. He approached me one day and asked me to do some things that were completely dishonest. Of course, I didn't comply, and it mitigated our opportunities with that organization. Within 6 months, that individual was fired because he was supporting a mistress on his company expense report in another country, including a lavish condominium in that country. It was all found out. He was escorted out of the building by security, and his whole life imploded. It was a little bit like the Key Bank building. And that's why I use the example of tell the truth, you only have to do it once. But you ever cross that line, you've got real problems. I think many of you are probably familiar with Clayton Christensen's book and the example of Enron. You all have those experiences in life, and I know we're about out of time, but you all have those experiences in life where you'll always know where you were when something happened. I remember when the space shuttle blew up. I'll always know where I was when that happened. 9/11, I'll always know where I was and what I was doing. I'll always know where I was when Enron unfolded, because I was in Houston. We do a lot of business down on the Gulf Coast, and I was there for meetings. Enron's office was in the Galleria area of Houston. There's kind of two downtowns, if you will. And I was in the Galleria, and I was meeting somebody for dinner at a restaurant in the Galleria. I walked in the restaurant, and the parking lot, by the way, was packed. It was completely full. And I thought, oh dear, I hadn't made a reservation. I worried, would I ever be able to get in? I walk in, and I look in the restaurant. The restaurant was completely empty. There was not one person at a table in the restaurant. The bar was completely packed, standing room only, and you could have heard a pin drop. And there were two big televisions on the wall reporting what was going on with Enron. Well, where do you think a lot of those Enron people went to drown their sorrows? They were in the bar, and it wasn't Diet Coke. And I will never forget where I was looking to see what the acts of a few did to destroy tremendous value in the lives of so many. And I was amazed to see what I saw. And it was one of those real visible lessons where I'll never forget the feeling I had. And so I think that's a personal decision. But really, I think you make that decision early in life. And as long as you've made that decision early in life, you don't ever really have to make the decision again. You say, I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to do the right thing. And then an opportunity comes, you don't even have to think about it. You know what you're going to do. One last question, then I think we're out of time. Yes?
Two questions, kind of. How many Savages work for Savage, and then how do you make the family dynamic work within the company?
Sounds kind of ominous, doesn't it? Savages. I think it's like Tarzan, savages. There are very few of us. There's only about a half a dozen members of our family that actually work with the business. And we're pretty strict about it. Our attitude is the way this company best supports all stakeholders is to succeed. And so now some of my colleagues that are here may say otherwise, but my attitude is it's who's ever best qualified, because I don't think you'll ever hire or retain the best talent if somebody feels like they have to look over their shoulder wondering if there's a nephew or a niece or a cousin or somebody coming up through the ranks. I can tell you I've had family members that have been terminated for this company, and we're very, very strict about it. And I think you don't do people any favors by giving them something they haven't earned. You actually set them up for big disappointment and failure. So that's how we approach it. Oh, we good? All right, thanks everybody.